The latest challenge to face European research funding organizations and the European Commission is the issue of public involvement. A number of scientific and societal challenges can be more efficiently addressed by public engagement and participation. This topic is rather hot because not only the complexities of brain diseases require new paradigms of interaction, but to tackle also the most pressing research questions. And therefore, for the panel discussion, I should move on my slide, but this does not work properly. I'm sorry. Here we go. As panelists, we welcome Donna Walsh. She is the Executive Director of the European Federation of Neurological Associations, in brief EFNA. We welcome Philippa Lowe. She is the Chair of Trustees of the England-wide charity Rethink Mental Illness and also a non-executive director of EUFAMI, a European charity for carers of those with mental illness. We also welcome Professor Dr. Cristina Tassorelli. She is the director of the Department of Brain and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Pavia. And Christina Fasser. She is the past president of Retina International. And not least, I like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Christina Müller. At DLI, she is also part of the Neuron Coordination Team and responsible for the conduction of joint transnational calls. She will provide us with some introductory information. So, Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hella. And can you switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. And hello to everyone. My name is Christina Müller, and I'm working as Hella for the ERA-NET Neuron Coordination Unit here at the DLRPT in Bonn. And I'm very honored to give this introduction to this very important panel discussion on how we can reinforce the links between lay organizations, basic scientists, and the clinicians. And as part of the ERA-NET Neuron team, I would like to focus on how we as funders try to tackle this challenge. Next, please. So generally, it often appears that there is not so much overlap between the realities of patients and carers on the one side and the scientific community on the other. Especially basic scientists, but also clinical scientists sometimes lack contact and insight to what is really important for the patients. And also on the other hand, the patients have a hard time to understand which scientific results are really important, which studies could be interesting for them, and how to interpret what the clinicians have to tell them. So both parties seem to speak different languages and have different priorities. And what we want to discuss today is how we can bring these two universes closer together and how we can address all the challenges that we have to face along the way, and how we at best can benefit from those advances. Next, please. For this, we in ERA-NET Neuron started to engage patients in 2019 with the great support of our Dutch funding partners, and we have now established patient engagement at different steps in our central funding instrument, which is which are the annual calls for proposals. Here on the left side, you see how such a call is usually conducted and the general procedure of such a call. And could you go one step back, please? Thank you. And what you can also see is that patient engagement steps in already at the very beginning. So when we consult patient representatives in our expert meetings before we write the call text. In this way, we can already raise awareness and set focus in the call text. Next, please. To further improve patient engagement in Neuron, we want to install this year for the first time a new step. We plan to to conduct a workshop for the patients in close cooperation with Donna Walsh from EFNA. And in this workshop, we will train and inform our potential patient reviewers about the neuron funding scheme. And we want to have also basic and clinical scientists on board to explain to the patients how translational research is conducted and how results might enter clinical practice. Next, please. Furthermore, on the applicant side to such a call, we strongly encourage to involve patients on various levels. For example, when writing their research proposals or planning them, and of course when conducting their research, but also when they disseminate their results. Next, please. And finally, we are a bit proud of the patient review process. We will conduct this year already for the third time. We have developed a procedure where patient reviewers provide their written evaluations to the applicants directly, so they can communicate their recommendations to the scientists. Furthermore, the patient reviewers actively partake at our peer review panel meetings to raise their concerns and to also gain visibility amongst the scientific panel. And I think with this, we've made a few steps towards the right direction. And we try to constantly improve those engagements by incorporating and collecting the feedback of the patient reviewers after such a call. Next, please. This leads me to, I think, the core element of this task when we want to link or enforce the links between science, patients, and society, which is the communication between all these involved parties. And I think since we all are not really experts in this new challenge, we should not face it alone. And therefore, we need a constant communication process in which we evaluate and readjust our procedures. And I think with this panel discussion today, we do exactly that. We discuss and we communicate, and hopefully we can benefit from those joint efforts to actually improve science, to improve therapies and the compliance of patients in those therapies, to improve the use of funds, and also to gain credibility of science in society. And with this, I would like to hand over to you, Hella, to open the panel discussion.
Well, thank you, Christina, for the overview on patient engagement in ERA-NET Neuron and the coming tasks. For us, the question is, however, when, where, and how to best involve the public. For research funders, the term public should be defined as to include patients or potential patients, caregivers, and people who use health and social care services, as well as people from umbrella organizations that represent service users. Such precise definition is necessary for funding measures because there is important distinction to be made between the perspectives of the public, the perspectives of people with a professional role in health and social care services, and not least carers, patients themselves, and research. Research approaches comprise translational, clinical, or healthcare research, and public involvement thus can address several different levels and roles. And this is why I would like to address Christina Fasser. The collaboration between research funders to prioritize research should include participation in workshops and thematic strategic symposia. You have been involved in Neuron's Foresight Symposium on Sensory Disorders in 2019 in Riga to provide the view of and important aspects for patients. Following this introduction, may I ask you, what were the most important successes in recent years, and how do you perceive the current situation and degree of patient involvement besides being subjects in clinical trials? Christina?
Anna, could you please unmute Christina? It could be difficult for her.
Anna Barra, could you please assist to unmute? I cannot.
I try.
Is it okay now?
Ah, yes.
No. Yeah,
Okay.
no, it's fine.
I'm so sorry. The system is a little bit complicated when you use
Do not
screen
worry.
readers.
We are happy
So-
to have you here.
Thank you very much indeed. And first, I would like to congratulate the Neuron website for your initiative and how you really carry out to try to include us as patients as much as possible. But my lessons from the years ago is in involvement of patients that at the very beginning, when I started to do promotion of research in about 25 years ago, we patients were just something to be observed. And later involvement was asked for, but only came in the last minutes. And in the last few years, in the different call, patient participation had to be involved. And there was still the risk of being a ticking process. But as soon when you have in the budget something to add a number to the participation of the patients, then patient organizations would be and patients involved much earlier. My experience is that patients and patient leaders, especially in my area, are really looking forward to participate, to bring in our lived experience and knowledge. And in the meantime, patients have also learned very carefully to abstract from our own very personal situation and to include also the situation of our friends, family members, etc. I see now coming really up much more openness to include patients, and this I take as a huge success of hard working of everybody involved during the last years. And I hope that this will be becoming normal situation in the future. But you, as Neuron Network, you're already excellent.
Oh, thank you so much. But that brings me to forward part of the question to Donna. Donna, you and EFNA as umbrella organization have been working on identifying and prioritizing the most patient-relevant topics. Participation of patient organizations in the assessment procedure of funding agencies is a very important aspect. And some of the EFNA members participated in the evaluation of research proposals already in Neuron's JTC on biomarkers in 2019. May I thus forward the same question for you, as you certainly got feedback from your members. How do you perceive the current situation?
Thank you, Ella. And I think there's two parts probably to this question. I think the first part is sort of successes that we have seen in this space, and then there's probably the challenges that we need to overcome. In terms of the biggest success, I mean, I think Christina alluded to this in her response. It's that patients and patient representatives are in demand like never before. Everybody wants a patient perspective. But I think on the flip side, that creates a major challenge for us as patient organizations to find the people who can fill all of these roles and who can perform these tasks. Because this doesn't just sit within research and development. We're also asked for patients to participate in policymaking, in consultations on healthcare service delivery, in regulatory affairs, in reimbursement processes. And we have a pretty finite pool of patient representatives who have the knowledge and the skills and the expertise to get involved in all of these types of roles and to take on these tasks. So I think when it comes to Neuron, if we narrow the scope of the question a little bit, as Christina mentioned in her introduction, there are lots of places within that neuron process where you can have patients involved. The challenge we have is finding the right patient to get involved and to make sure that they are trained, that they are empowered, that they have the capacity to be able to work with you. And I think this has meant that we have seen a proliferation of training initiatives for patient representatives. So we at EFNA, for example, run our own training initiatives for neurology advocates. We've had workshops on topics like science for advocates, patient involvement in neuroscience R&D, for example, and that is starting to help address the challenge that we face, but it's probably not enough, and it's something that we need to continue to do. And I think another challenge is not just kind of building a very sophisticated infrastructure for patient involvement. That's been done in lots of places. There are guidelines for patient involvement that can be followed, and we can really find patients and bring them to the table. The issue I think that we really have to overcome, and this goes back I think to the neuron review process as well, is how do we take that patient perspective and integrate it into the decisions that are being taken? So how can we make sure that patient involvement is actually meaningful, but it's also influential? Because if we get patients to read the scientific proposals, if we get them to bring their perspective to the table, if we ask them lots of questions, that's lovely, that's very nice, that's a box ticked. But if we then only add up the scores from the scientific advisors, what's the point? So I think that one of the challenges we need to think about is how we can gather the patient perspective, but also what kind of measures or scales or logarithms can we actually build to put a number on that, to integrate it into the decision-making process, and to make sure that that patient involvement is really meaningful and makes a difference. So I think that's the feedback that we get, that the infrastructures are improving, that patients are more and more being brought to the table, but we're still a bit unsure whether what those patients have to say is actually making a difference to the decisions that are being taken at the end of the process.
Okay, so a clearer feedback and integration. Well, thank you for that. Philippa, families and carers, clinicians and researchers, neurologists and psychiatrists already face the challenges of the demographic change, the aging population on chronic diseases, particularly in the area of brain diseases. There's a common saying, there are fewer to care for more. From your viewpoint as carer and representative of a care charity, how would you answer the question from your perspective? What can be done? Philippa? Anna-Bara, could you please also unmute Philippa Lowe?
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I forgot.
Oh, you're there. Fine.
I've done this so many times. I was just saying, Hella, thank you very much for the introduction. And I'd just like to say that I'm a carer for my son who has schizophrenia. And I've just worked out since it's 24 years ago today since he was admitted first admitted to a psychiatric hospital because of his psychosis. Yes, you're right about the demands on carers. And particularly, we mustn't forget, how could we forget, the present COVID epidemic and how much more demand that is making on carers. And I think that one of the things we're concerned about at Rethink Mental Illness is that though there's a lot of awareness about the influence of COVID on common mental illnesses, people don't fully realise the impact on existing severe mental health conditions, which is quite substantial. I think that research, as well as something I'm a little bit more involved with on a day-to-day basis, which is about services for those who need care, supported housing, job finding services and so on. I'm more familiar with that. And we do use a lot of service user involvement for that. And I think that its advantages are that this can make it appropriate, accessible and acceptable to people. And I think the same principles certainly apply to mental health research. I just wanted to emphasize that there's not just one type of involvement, but more of a continuum of methods, which has at the bottom of the continuum mere information giving to patient participants. And at the top of the hierarchy, it is experts by experience actually being in the lead and making the final decisions. At Rethink Mental Illness, what we go for is something pretty near the top, which we call co-production. And this is about professionals or experts by training, as we might call them, working together with experts by experience, with all parties' perspectives valued equally. To give an example, Rethink has recently facilitated the co-production of a pilot for a new initiative for mental health care in one of the English counties. This was initiated by our National Health Service, which has pledged a large sum of money for their long-term plan for health improvement, including for mental health improvement. And we've recently been funded for more pilots. So that's my experience, and that's my conclusion so far. I'll be happy to answer any more questions. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much. Please stay in line. And I would like also to ask Professor Tassorelli, the feasible activities on the researchers' side include engagement of lay people in research projects where applicable, by e.g. offering advice as members of a project steering committee, commenting and developing research materials, and undertaking interviews with research participants. You coordinate a neuron-funded research consortium. At which steps did you involve patients in your research projects, and at which steps do you, as scientists, benefit the most from increasing their involvement? And where would you like to see more commitment to engage patients from your peers?
Thank you, Ella, for the question. Thank you to Neuron for this very interesting day. To answer your question, I would say, as a patient myself, suffering from a disease whose pathophysiology is complex and manifestations are extremely proteiform, migraine, I've learned how important it is to put the patient's need in the first place. This has to be done at the very beginning of a project idea, in my view, to make the project really meaningful. So my approach is very basic. My approach is that if I can explain a project idea in less than 2 minutes to a group of patients, and this evokes enthusiasm, questions, or curiosity, then that is likely to be a good research idea, and I will follow it. This does not mean that the project has to be simple. No, the project I coordinate is quite complex. It includes preclinical research, clinical research, and all tied, the data from preclinical and clinical research, they are tied in by with the machine learning, which seems quite complicated, but the ultimate goal is very simple and solid. It is the identification of predictors of response to new treatments that are available for migraine. But these treatments are quite expensive, and they will not be available for every patient. So with the project output, we will provide a scientifically based framework for prioritizing access to those who really can benefit from the drug and optimize the use of resources. At the same time, we will change a little bit the perspective that now is, okay, try this drug, let's see if it works for you, to, okay, this treatment is personalized for you and has the highest chances of effectiveness. And it is a totally different perspective. It is a better perspective, of course, which is rational, reassuring, and engaging for the patient. So to answer, where would I like to see more commitment to engage patients from my peers, I would say from the very beginning, during the project lifetime, and then I think it is very, very important for the dissemination phase and speeding up the uptake of the output of the project. Right,
thank you very much. That was clear enough. To all, I would like to address a question, but then in order. What can the different parties involved do specifically to reinforce the links between patients and lay organizations and science? And here I would like to hear first the view from a funder. Christina, may I address you first, please?
Cristina Tassorelli?
Okay, I'm sorry, my colleague Christina.
Okay.
I'm really sorry, we have so many Christinas here.
Okay, yeah, yes, I want to try to answer that question. And I maybe want to also refer to the panel discussion before. I think that we as funders have to set a stronger focus to fund research with a realistic potential for actual translation. And I think in Neuron, in our format, we have already a very strong focus on that objective. And we emphasize that in each call for proposals. And I think we have a great potential here in Neuron because we can actually have all of the parties at one table. So we have usually in our consortia clinicians, basic scientists, and we now have also the patients on board. So I think we have great potential to make a few more steps. And we actually want to further advance this translational focus by involving the patients in the concept phase of the calls, by doing this new workshop where we also have all the parties involved. So we as funders are there. We want to have basic and clinical scientists there, and we want to have also lay people and patients there. And what we also do for the scientists, on the other hand, to promote translation is we offer trainings, for example, about workshops about quality in research or workshops in statistics. And with this, we want to give the researchers a tool set at hand to really conduct high quality research, which I think is the basis for producing excellent results, and only they can actually accomplish the translation into clinical practice.
Okay, thank you. Professor Tassorelli, from your perspective as researchers, how can the links between patient and lay organizations and science be reinforced?
Well, from my perspective, probably it is a fortunate perspective, because I believe that from my point of view, my research, there is already a very strong relationship, and I would say alliance with the patient organization. But that is probably my personal history, because in few years ago, let's say 15 years ago, maybe, I contributed to fund the European Headache and Migraine Alliance. So for me, the collaboration, the close collaboration with the patient and their view has always been important. One thing that I see more important right now, also thinking of my peers, probably what is more important at this moment, is my personal view, is to strengthen the collaboration between preclinical and clinical science. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes there is a gap between the two. So preclinical research, they do a great job, but then it's far away from translation, you know. And so there is this link that is missing between the two of them. And also, I think that understanding preclinical research is probably the thing that is, it might be more difficult for patients. So having preclinical research, speak with clinician and with patient, probably with smooth the difficulties that may be encountered.
Okay, thank you. Philippa, what is your viewpoint on reinforcing? You have to unmute your microphone, please. Thank you.
Yeah, done it. Yes, I think the most important point in terms of improving communication and collaboration are to emphasize the shared goals between the two parties of the researchers and the patients and their carers. And that's the key to effective collaboration. I think there's a need for guidance and training for all those involved, especially to increase the confidence of the service users and carers. I'm involved with mental health research, mostly at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience in London. And there I'm a carer and advisor, and I sit on research meetings along with a service user advisor. And most of these projects are to do with the damaging and life-shortening physical health aspects of psychosis. I remember that at the beginning of our involvement, one of the researchers would always meet us for a very brief session before and after each meeting to explain the jargon and the acronyms and the concepts in the papers we were to consider. And this was very helpful. So I would advise that as an approach. Okay. I think also, if I can just add one point, I think we need to, rather, as well as emphasising the differences in terms of basic knowledge, I think we ought to emphasise the what researchers and patients and carers also have in common.
Okay.
Mental illness is a feature of very many, if not in our immediate families, is a feature of very many of our lives. And each side could do more to understand the other, I think. That's
a very valid point. Christina Fasser, how would you see the major issue for reinforcing the links? Anna Barra, can you please unmute Christina Fasser again? Yeah, Christina, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Coming from retinal degenerations, we as patients, patient organizations, we are used to work in a situation where what the patients would call unmet need, the unmet need was there is no treatment. And that meant that we were used to support basic research. We had then to learn how translational research would work and then how clinical research is working. And what we as patients learned in this time and in a hard time and where we really would have loved more support is that, as just was said before, that we had more explanations about acronyms, about jargon, what you are using, and then also what would the significance of a translation, and also that we would have more accessibility, and accessibility in different sense, in the sense of information for the patients, what is the relevance, said in a lay language, and scientific language is also very, very careful, and is very careful not to say something wrong. But with this very strong carefulness, you give the feeling of insecurity. And then it's very difficult when you're not used to that to understand what the researchers really mean. And then as people with a sensority disability also, in a matter of fact being blind, what we really would need is accessibility of the documents. Mm-hmm. The documents, for instance, in most research submissions are very complicated made and are for us mostly inaccessible without sighted help. So this would be of huge help for people in my area to help, and of course education.
Okay, thank you, Christina. And Donna, what is your viewpoint? You would perhaps underline that.
Yeah, I think I agree with what has been said already, but I also wanted to maybe mention a couple of other aspects. So back in December 2019, we had a workshop bringing together patients, patient representatives, funders, researchers, policymakers, and other stakeholders in the neuroscience research and development space. And we spent 2 days, the first day dedicated more to clinical research and the second more to basic research, which you participated in, Ella, on behalf of Neuron, to understand, I suppose, what were the barriers to really optimizing patient involvement in neuroscience and areas maybe that we should focus on to really optimize and to reinforce these links. And we came up with 3 main areas that we felt should be addressed. And I think some of these have already come up in the presentation and discussion today. So the first was around priority setting, and Christina mentioned this earlier, and well, both Christinas mentioned this earlier, that we need to really involve patients from the outset in terms of setting the priorities for research, in really flagging up the unmet needs, because if we involve patients from there, then you will find that they're more inclined to continue to engage and to be involved all the way along the continuum, as well as at the end in terms of promoting, disseminating, and pushing for uptake of those research results. So that was a clear priority area for us. The second was around training and education, and I think everybody said this, that we need to educate the patients and the patient representatives to get involved. But we also need to educate the funders and the researchers in terms of how you can do patient involvement right. Because it's not just a case of inviting a couple of patients, having a conversation, and that's job done. It can be something that you can get wrong very easily. So I think there needs to be research in both stakeholder groups. And the final bit goes back to what I said earlier on in the introduction, is this kind of matchmaking piece, in making sure that the right researchers work with the right patients at the right time and in the right way. So it's not just finding, one expert patient in the field of neurology or neuroscience and having that person go around and speak to every research consortia in Europe. I mean, that was something we saw maybe 10 years ago, where the same face spoke to every company, to every research institute, and brought the same perspective to every discussion they engaged in. So we need to make sure that we're finding a diverse profile, building a pool of patients, and making sure that the right patients are involved in the right stages. And that could be somebody very expert, or it could be a person with lived experience who is just sharing their experience as a patient with a particular condition. So I think we need to be a little bit more focused in terms of who and when it comes to involving patients.
Right, clear enough. Thank you very much. I see we are already entering the final phase of our discussion, and I would like to have some sort of statements with specific question to each of you. And first goes to Philippa. From your perspective as carer and patient, what can, in your opinion, improve the communication? What is the most neglected part? Philippa, can you unmute your...
Yes, I've done it. I remember this time.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Well, I think in stressing the value of involvement, it's necessary to explain both the why and the how, but I would put the emphasis actually on the how, because many people might feel that this is a very practically difficult thing to tackle, and it's obviously most important to encourage action. For example, people would need to be schooled in how to recruit experts by experience, or whether service users or carers, and how to ensure that they represent the diverse populations who will ultimately benefit from the research or the services, and that is quite difficult. I mean, I'm very conscious, both in my charity and in attending conferences like this, what a very white sort of area we are. And this is particularly true in the UK. And we need to know what is happening, not only with people who are ethnically diverse, but other sorts of diversities.
Right. Thank you. Professor Tassorelli, from your perspective as scientist, do scientists need trainings how to explain their research to the public and lay people?
Yes, absolutely. They need to convey the relevance and the significance of their research, of the output of their research to the patient, and they must be able to do that, or they must learn to do that. The Congress we organize, we have an international Congress every other year. We always include at the end of the Congress a lay event on the final day, where there are 2 or 3 top researchers. They illustrate the highlights of the Congress presentation in lay language. And these are very important moments. Patients, they do like them. And it is a good training also for the scientists. They are very good on the platform, on the scientific platform, but they need to be also very good on the lay platform to explain really what is the output of their research. And I would like that there could be something similar also on scientific journals. They should have like a section in each issue, at least on the online version, arranged for the open access of the data of the papers that are published in that issue. This would help patient organization and media to reverberate the data from authoritative and reliable sources to the wider audience. And I think it will be also helpful to fight the fake news to which individual patients may be exposed on the web.
Thank you very much. Christina Fasser, we already heard that you would enthuse education and training also on the patient side. Would you comment also that training is needed on the researcher side?
Yes, absolutely. Patients and researchers, there are two languages they are used. And I think researchers should really be trained to give the information and to educate the wider public, because they are also there in a way employers, because mostly pay their research to be paid. And I made, for instance, an experience that I'm involved in INT programs for young researchers, and we have started to do it in the midterm time, training for the young researchers how to tell their research to the patients, and it was on basic research, and we have seen that the talks have considerably changed after this teaching time. Some people are natural communicators and they will be always good, but some people just have to learn, and I especially think that they should learn it when they are very young.
Okay, thank you very much. Donna, you have 1 minute for a final statement. What do you think for remuneration for patients?
So I think, patients obviously should be paid for their time to be involved at the same level as the other stakeholders. So if nobody's getting paid, it's not a big issue. I think the major controversy here is when patients have found themselves at tables where the doctors and the researchers and the other stakeholders were being paid and the patients were not, because that really, I think, instills the perception that the patient perspective is not as valuable as the perspectives of the others, and that definitely has to change. It is being done in other areas. There are guidelines produced by the pharmaceutical industry, for example, for some of the regulatory groups like EMA. Some of the reimbursement agencies nationally pay patient representatives for their time. So this is definitely an area, I think, where we can learn from others. So I think absolutely that's important. And the last thing I just wanted to say about patient involvement, echoing what Philippa said, is we need to expand the pool to other demographics. I remember nominating patients to come to a neuron meeting, and they were all either Dutch or Belgian ladies of middle age, and I thought they're all going to say the same thing. So we need to make sure that we have younger people, older people, people from different geographical areas, different socioeconomic backgrounds, to really ensure that that patient representation is representative of the community and is not just a very narrow perspective from a privileged group of people who have the time and the inclination to get involved. And by paying people, you can make that happen.
Okay, right. We take that as a take-home message. So it's concluded that all sides, funders, researchers, carers, and the actual and potential patients will benefit from enhanced public involvement. And I have here to close this panel discussion. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I would like to continue. And I really like to cordially thank you, all the participants, for their lively and enthusiastic contribution. We really look forward to take home the message and strive to implement as much as possible in the coming neuron period. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.